Hello everyone, my name is Rochelle Innocent and I'm the founder and CEO of Project Purpose. Welcome to our channel. Our community is focused on fostering the intellectual and character development in children. We do this through our parent-child workshops that are focused on 4 themes: autonomy, self-efficacy, compassion, and self-concept, in order to cultivate grit, perseverance, and resilience in each child. And we are so thrilled to be offering one of the first of its kind digital, virtual, and continuous learning environments, enabling parents and children to connect from all around the world. At Project Purpose, our overarching mandate is to renew and rebuild family, community, and relationships. Our different social media platforms provide us with an opportunity to have discussions and to create space for all topics that relate to family, community, and relationships with ourselves as well as with others, with a primary focus on mental health and education. More precisely, the ways that the institutions of mental health and education play a role and have played a role in our societies at large. These discussions and debates provide us with an opportunity to think critically about what needs to change within these structures for us to live up to our bold slogan: support, protect, and empower each child through youth-focused development, better known as leadership in juvenescence. We recognize that in valuing our children's leadership potential, this also translates as recreating and co-creating environments, both socially and politically, that will enable our children to thrive. For those of you who are particularly keen on the topic, we also write thought pieces every other Monday. We have a thought piece scheduled to drop this upcoming Monday, so definitely be sure to meander over to the website and check out our online content. Now, if it is the case that you are looking for a listening alternative, well, we're available wherever podcasts are playing, and we've provided you with access to a few links down below. Now, as is the convention, be sure to subscribe, hit that post notification bell so that you are aware of every time we post. And of course, if you like these conversations and you want to keep them going, then I do hope that you give us a like. I'm not that great at growth strategy, but every like really does help. So thank you so much again, and let's get into it. Allo de Mac. Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another segment here on Project Purpose. For those of you who are new, we cover topics that relate to mental health, mental wellness, and education on a week-by-week basis. And our topic of discussion today is education. On the conversation around education, I want to talk about the education that starts at home. And that's around history, around knowing your history. And knowing your history can be so contextual, so relative, but I think as it relates to your personal history, you're only going to have a deeper appreciation for yourself or all of the different people that have brought you to this here and now state of being if you understand the history, the struggles, the trials, the challenges. And I think that this is just so important because as a Canadian, we don't have much history, but that doesn't mean that we're not impacted by world history. And I think that there's just too little of an emphasis placed in the world history that brought about Canada and all of the different tenets and the beliefs and the principles that Canadians hold. And me living abroad as a Canadian, not having much by way of history and having to develop my own penchant for exploration and for discovery and driving sort of my own education around history, I'm always constantly just amazed at how much history exists that definitely has an influence on my life and on who I am as an individual. And that's based on my parents' lineage, that's based on me being Canadian, me being born in Canada, like all the different things that had to take place all around the world for my existence to be what it is. So that's me being a little bit existential. But I think that when we think about history, it matters in every context and situation. I think when you're meeting new people, you want to know their history. You want to understand, well, what are the themes that are going to be sort of the undercurrent behind our interactions? And you can get that sense without becoming biased by just having a general sense of the history. And so there are lots of different people where I didn't know their history, not generally, not specifically, like I didn't have any periphery whatsoever beyond how they felt inclined to share about themselves as it relates to me. But sometimes it's important when you're starting from ground zero to do a little bit of your own intel, to have a sense of the history, have a sense of the history of the dynamics of the relationships that you're entering into, because that history can be what changes the way that you navigate decision making in those settings. And again, that's interrelationally, that's professionally, that's personally. In every setting and situation, there is a history that we all need to be cognizant of, and we need to recognize that just because it happened a few years ago, whether that's a couple years, years or 10 years or 100 years or even a couple thousand years, which I'm realizing, like even some of the studying that I'm doing right now, I'm talking about like different historical facts that took place in the 19th century, and like we just don't think about things that take place in the 19th century. But then if we think about the here and now, a lot of the progress here and now is based on steps and revolution and revolutionary ideas from way back then. And so if we don't know that, if we constantly sort of undermine and underappreciate the impact that our history has on our day-to-day lives, then we're going to put ourselves in a position where we might repeat some of the history that we wouldn't want to repeat. And I think that it's really important also when we gauge history, and that's interpersonal history, that's geographical history, that's political history, like every kind of history just has a role to play in how we approach every situation and setting, and the kinds of questions that we want to ask, and the kind of questions that we maybe want to keep to ourselves. And I just feel like there's just not enough emphasis on being mindful of the history so that you're not doomed to repeat it, and also that you're using it to navigate your steps with that hindsight as your leverage. And so we think hindsight is 2020, but we don't only need to depend on our own hindsight. We don't need to only maximize and capitalize on the failures that we ourselves have. We can capitalize on the failures and the learning and the history of the people who came before us. And again, this can be in a very contextual setting. This can be in the settings that we're walking into, in the communities that we're taking part of, in the sports group that we're taking part of, whether that's the history of the coach, or whether that's the history, like every one of us has a personal history. And so all I'm trying to say is there needs to be a value of understanding that history, and that valuing of the history that informs the decision making of the people that you're interacting with is important. It's important to gauge that history. And I think that so much of living in Canada was about erasing that history. It's like, oh, well, that history doesn't matter, you're Canadian now. And I don't think people say that explicitly, but I find that there's such an undervaluation of history in and of itself. Like there's not very much by way of reference of history. We maybe glorify like the birth date of different things, like, you know, the national holiday, in Canada Day, but we don't celebrate the little intermediary steps that brought us to those big monumental moments. And so I've been reflecting a whole lot lately on history and on the significance of history in the way that it's informed and supported my own decision making and helping me to navigate things in tricky situations that I wouldn't have had periphery were it not for me borrowing from the history and the lessons learned from around me. And so that's history that we all have access to. And so this history based on the places we go visit, and oftentimes we like to go to museums and visit different places. We learn about some of the figures that have really shaped society as it is today. And sometimes it's just these little tidbits that we don't think twice about that end up being what shift and change the way that we navigate in the world around us moving forward. And so I want to come in here and talk about history, the power and the importance of history, and making sure that anytime that you're navigating situations that are brand new, then nothing is never a blank slate. There's always a history that plays into every situation, place, and circumstance, and every person that we encounter. And so it's important that we give ourselves the opportunity to learn that history, to allow that history to help us get a sense as to, well, how do I navigate accordingly? How do I make sure that I'm not repeating past mistakes of past individuals or of past, decisions that were made that were thought to be strategic but maybe didn't land accordingly? Or even if I wanted to repeat that trajectory, well, what changes can I make based on understanding the history? And so that's what I want to come here and talk about, just give you some periphery into some of my own streams of consciousness that were happening this week, which is really around just like the magnitude of history and how significant and how important it is. And I think that it's so important that it's something that I'm definitely going to invest in continuously in my own life, like just learning the histories of the different people that I'm surrounded by on a day-to-day basis, because honestly, we're informed by very different histories. And being in Portugal, their history is completely apart from the history that I was ever exposed to growing up. So it's just really interesting to engage with people who were informed by different histories and see how that shifts and changes the way we navigate around one another. So that was the food for thought that I had to share with you today. Hopefully helpful, hopefully something that you keep in mind. You doggy take that tidbit of wisdom. As it relates to my stalking situation, no information for you as yet, but you will be the first to know when I do. And thank you so much for tuning in, and I look forward to chatting with all of you very soon. We'll talk to you later.